Hey everyone, welcome back. You wanted to know more about giving feedback, particularly the tougher kind, the kind that helps people improve without, making them feel terrible.
Yeah, it's a real art, isn't it?
It is, and luckily there's research on that, and that's exactly what we are diving into today, how to make feedback truly effective.
Even when it's pointing out areas that need work.
Right, it's not about being nice or mean.
Exactly.
It's about making sure the feedback actually leads to positive change for the person receiving it.
Absolutely. And, the source material we're looking at today, it really gets to the heart of that.
Okay, lay it on me.
So it's an excerpt from a research article,
Okay.
and it's called Common Pitfalls in Negative Feedback, a deep dive for enhanced organizational performance.
Okay, pitfalls.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound very encouraging. Like, what's an example of one of these feedback traps that we might be falling into?
Well, one of the most common ones, and this is something that I think we all kind of intuitively know is bad, but the research really backs it up. It's called lack of specificity.
Hmm.
And it's that feedback that is so vague, it's practically useless.
Oh, yeah.
Think of it like saying to someone, you need to be more organized.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what does that even mean?
I've gotten feedback like that, and it's so frustrating because you're left wondering, okay, well, what am I actually doing wrong?
Exactly. Instead of these vague pronouncements,
Yeah.
effective feedback needs to be grounded in specific observations
Okay.
and examples.
So rather than saying you're always late,
Right.
you might say, I noticed that you arrived 10 minutes late to the last 3 team meetings.
Exactly.
Okay, so one is a general complaint,
Yeah.
and the other is actual information that the person can use to make a change.
Right. And imagine the difference in how you feel receiving those two types of feedback.
Yeah.
That vague, you're always late.
Mm-hmm.
That can trigger a defensive reaction, right? It kind of shuts down the part of your brain that's open to learning.
Yeah.
But specific feedback with concrete examples is much more likely to be received as helpful and constructive.
So it's not just about being clear.
Right.
It's about how our brains actually process the information.
Yes.
Exactly. That's so fascinating.
And it highlights why getting feedback right is so important because it can literally impact how someone learns and grows.
Okay, vague feedback is out. What's another pitfall we should avoid?
This one's pretty common too, and it can be really damaging. It's the pitfall of personal attacks.
Ooh.
When feedback feels less like constructive criticism and more like a character assassination.
Yikes. I can imagine how demoralizing that would be.
It is, and it completely undermines the purpose of feedback, which is to help someone improve.
Right.
So instead of saying something like, you're sloppy and disorganized, which is a direct attack on someone's personality,
Yeah.
you might say, I noticed the report you submitted had several formatting errors and key information was missing, which made it difficult to understand.
Okay, so one is a judgment on the person.
Right? The other is a specific observation about the work itself.
Exactly, and that distinction is critical. Feedback should focus on actions, behaviors, and outcomes, not on someone's inherent qualities or character flaws.
Okay, so specificity and avoiding personal attacks, those are crucial.
Yes.
What else can kind of send our feedback efforts off the rails?
This next one I think a lot of us might be guilty of, even with good intentions.
Okay.
It's focusing exclusively on the negative.
Oh, right. Like only pointing out what someone did wrong
Yeah.
and completely ignoring anything they did well.
Yeah, it's like getting a report card with only the failing grades highlighted.
Exactly.
And just like that report card, it can
Yeah.
leave someone feeling really discouraged and defeated.
Yeah.
So even when we're giving feedback about areas that need improvement, it's important to acknowledge the positive aspects of someone's performance,
Okay.
their strengths and their contributions.
So it's about balance, right?
Like you might say, hey, this report wasn't your best work, but I really appreciated how you handled that difficult client interaction last week.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about maintaining a sense of perspective
Right?
and reminding the person that they have valuable skills and qualities, even if they made a mistake or need to develop in certain areas.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It feels more like a conversation about growth rather than just like a laundry list of shortcomings.
Exactly.
What other feedback traps should we be aware of?
This one might seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how often it happens.
Okay.
It's the lack of preparation.
Yeah.
Have you ever received feedback that felt off the cuff,
Uh-huh.
rambling, and not well thought out?
Oh, yeah. It's like the person giving the feedback is just kind of like venting their frustrations rather than actually trying to be helpful.
Precisely. And that kind of feedback is rarely effective.
Yeah.
So the research emphasizes the importance of taking the time to plan the conversation, gather specific examples, and think about the desired outcome. What do you want the person to take away from this feedback?
So instead of just like launching into a feedback session, it's worth taking a few minutes to jot down some notes or even like create a little outline.
Absolutely, because it shows the person that you respect their time and that you've put thought into what you want to say.
Okay.
It also helps you stay focused on the key points and avoid getting sidetracked.
It's like the difference between showing up for a meeting prepared and just showing up empty-handed.
Exactly.
Okay, so preparation is key.
Yes.
What other feedback faux pas should we avoid?
This one is all about setting the right scene.
Okay.
Pitfall number 5 is inappropriate timing and location.
Oh,
So think about it.
yeah.
Where and when we receive feedback can greatly influence how we perceive it and respond to it.
This is a good one. I once had a boss who loved giving constructive criticism in the middle of the office with everyone listening.
Oh my gosh.
Talk about awkward and
Look,
embarrassing.
that's a recipe for disaster.
It was so bad.
The research highlights the importance of sensitivity when it comes to timing and location.
Okay.
So giving feedback during a time of high stress when someone is already upset or in a public setting, that can create discomfort, resistance, and even humiliation.
Yeah, imagine getting harsh feedback right before you have to give a big presentation
Whoa.
or like during the company holiday party.
Right.
Talk about bad vibes.
So a private, quiet space and a time when everyone is calm and receptive, that's much more conducive to a productive conversation.
No drive-by feedback allowed.
No.
We need to be mindful about creating the right environment for these conversations.
Absolutely. It's about respecting the person's dignity and creating a safe space for open communication.
This is all great stuff. We've covered 5 major feedback pitfalls so far.
Yeah.
And I'm already rethinking some of my cast approaches.
I'm glad to hear that, but we're only halfway through.
What?
We still have 5 more pitfalls to explore, and then we'll dive into some practical strategies for giving truly effective feedback that helps people grow.
Okay. I'm ready for more. This is really eye-opening.
Great.
Okay, so we were talking about the importance of, choosing the right time and place for giving feedback.
Right?
What's the next feedback faux pas that we should be aware of?
This one's a bit tricky because it might seem helpful on the surface, but it can actually be quite detrimental.
Okay.
It's the pitfall of making comparisons with other people.
Oh, I've been on the receiving end of this one. Like, why can't you be more like so-and-so? Or, this person would have handled this so much better.
Yeah, you're right. It's incredibly demotivating.
So deflating.
Yeah. The research calls this comparisons with others, and it really emphasizes how this approach undermines individual growth
Okay.
and creates unhealthy competition.
I see how it might seem useful to point to someone who's doing well as an example,
Right.
but it does end up feeling like a put down rather than helpful feedback.
Exactly, and it misses the point entirely.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own strengths, weaknesses, and learning styles, so comparing someone to another person just sets them up for failure
Right.
because they're not being measured against their own potential but against someone else's.
So how do we avoid this trap?
Yeah.
Like, if someone is struggling with a particular skill, is it ever okay to point to someone who's excelling in that area as an example?
It's all about the framing.
Okay.
So instead of saying, look, Sarah always gets her reports in on time, why can't you?
Right.
You could say, I've noticed you've missed the deadline for the past couple of reports. Let's talk about what's getting in the way and create a plan to ensure you can meet those deadlines consistently.
Okay, so you're focusing on the individual's performance and finding solutions rather than creating this unhelpful comparison.
Exactly. It's about addressing the specific behavior and finding strategies that work for that person, not trying to make them into a carbon copy of someone else.
Got it. Comparisons are out. What's the next pitfall we should steer clear of?
This one can be particularly frustrating for the person receiving the feedback.
Okay.
It's the pitfall of not offering solutions. So imagine being told you've made a mistake or that something needs to change, but you're given no guidance on how to actually do it.
It's like being told you're lost, but you're not given a map or any directions.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
highlights how ineffective this kind of feedback can be. It just leaves the person feeling stuck and demoralized without a clear path forward.
Right, so it's not enough to just point out the problem.
Right.
We also need to provide some direction, some guidance.
Absolutely. The research stresses the importance of not just identifying errors or areas for improvement, but offering alternatives, suggestions, resources, or support
Okay.
to help the person actually make those changes.
So, for example, instead of saying your presentation was disorganized and confusing, you might say,
I might say, I noticed that your presentation jumped around a bit and lacked a clear structure. Have you considered using a storyboarding technique to map out the key points and create a more logical flow? I'm happy to share some resources that might be helpful.
Okay, so you're not just criticizing, you're providing concrete suggestions and offering support. Exactly.
That feels so much more empowering for the person receiving the feedback.
It shifts the focus from blame and judgment to problem solving and growth.
Solutions are key.
Hmm.
What's the next pitfall we should be mindful of?
This one is closely related to the previous one.
Okay.
It's the pitfall of lack of follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
We might give well-intentioned, specific feedback, even offer solutions,
Right.
but then we drop the ball
Yeah.
and fail to follow up.
It's like planting a seed and never watering it.
Exactly.
You can't expect it to flourish without ongoing care and attention.
The research emphasizes that feedback is not a one-time event.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
Okay.
Follow-up is crucial to ensure that the feedback has been understood,
Right.
that the person is making progress, and that they have the support they need to continue growing.
So what does good follow-up look like in practice?
Right.
Is it just a matter of checking in occasionally and saying, hey, how are things going with that feedback I gave you?
It can be that informal, but it can also be more structured.
You might schedule regular check-in meetings, revisit goals and action plans, provide additional resources or training as needed, and simply reinforce the positive changes you're seeing.
Okay, so it's about making feedback a continuous conversation.
Yes.
Not a one-and-done lecture.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the next pitfall we need to avoid?
This one has to do with the dynamic of the feedback conversation itself.
Okay.
It's the pitfall of poor dialogue, specifically the lack of two-way communication.
I can see how that would be a problem if feedback feels like a one-sided lecture.
Yes,
The person receiving it is less likely to be receptive or engaged.
that's exactly right. Feedback shouldn't be a monologue.
Okay.
It should be a dialogue,
Right.
a collaborative process where both parties feel heard and respected.
So instead of just delivering a laundry list of critiques,
Right.
we need to create space for the other person to respond, ask questions, and share their perspective.
Absolutely. The research highlights the importance of active listening, asking clarifying questions, acknowledging the other person's feelings and concerns, and even being open to adjusting your feedback based on their input.
That makes sense. It feels more like a partnership,
Yeah,
where you're working together to find solutions and achieve a shared goal.
exactly. And that kind of collaborative approach is much more likely to lead to positive, lasting change.
We've covered 8 feedback pitfalls so far.
Yes, we have.
What's the next one we need to watch out for?
This one is a bit of a doozy, and it's something I think we've all encountered in one form or another.
Okay.
It's using feedback as an outlet for our own frustrations.
Oh, yikes. Like when someone is clearly using feedback as a way to vent their anger or personal judgments,
That's it.
rather than actually trying to help the other person improve.
And it's completely inappropriate and unproductive.
Yeah.
The research stresses that feedback should always be focused on performance improvement,
Right.
not on the giver's personal feelings or emotional baggage.
So feedback isn't therapy for the giver.
Exactly.
It's a tool to help the receiver grow and develop.
Precisely. It's about maintaining professionalism, objectivity, and a genuine desire to support the other person's growth.
Yeah, it's easy for that line to get blurred, especially when we're dealing with stressful situations or challenging personalities.
It's true, but it's crucial to be self-aware and to check our motivations before delivering feedback.
Okay.
Ask yourself, am I approaching this conversation with a genuine desire to help, or am I simply trying to get something off my chest?
That's a really important question to ask.
It is.
We need to make sure we're coming from the right place.
Exactly. And if we're not, it's better to take a step back,
Right.
process our emotions, and approach the conversation when we can do so constructively and with the other person's best interests in mind.
Okay, so we're 9 pitfalls down, 1 to go.
Yes.
What's the final feedback trap we need to be aware of?
This last one might seem a bit counterintuitive,
Okay.
but it's a pitfall nonetheless.
Right.
It's being too indirect or hesitant to give feedback at all.
Wait, so you're saying that not giving feedback can also be a problem?
It can be, especially if it stems from a fear of conflict or a desire to avoid difficult conversations.
Okay.
Sometimes we hold back feedback that could be valuable because we're worried about upsetting the other person or damaging the relationship.
It's like we convince ourselves that it's better to just let things slide than to wreck the boat.
Right. But the problem is that by avoiding these conversations, we're actually doing a disservice to the person and to the team.
Sure.
We're depriving them of the opportunity to learn, grow, and reach their full potential.
So there's a balance.
There is.
We don't want to be overly critical or confrontational, but we also don't want to shy away from giving feedback that could be genuinely helpful.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot between being supportive and being honest,
Right.
between being empathetic and being assertive.
Yes.
And sometimes that means having those tough conversations, even if they're uncomfortable.
So we've covered 10 common feedback pitfalls.
We have.
I'm definitely going to be more mindful of these traps in my own interactions.
I'm glad to hear that. But remember, it's not just about avoiding pitfalls.
Okay.
It's also about developing strategies to give truly effective feedback.
Right.
Feedback that inspires growth and positive change.
All right, I'm ready for those strategies. Let's dive into the positive side of feedback and learn how to make it a powerful tool for development. All right, so we spent a lot of time talking about what not to do, but now I want to know how to actually do it right.
Right.
What are some practical strategies that we can use to give feedback that is truly effective and helps people grow?
Well, there's several approaches,
Okay.
and some of them might sound familiar because they directly address those pitfalls that we were talking about.
Okay, that makes sense. So where do we start?
So one of the most effective strategies
Okay.
is to use a structured framework like the STAR model.
Okay, I think I've heard of this one.
Yeah.
Something about stars and performance reviews.
The STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result.
Okay.
And it's a way to provide feedback that is specific and contextualized.
Okay, can you give me an example of how that works?
Absolutely. So
Hmm.
instead of saying something vague like your communication needs work,
Mm-hmm.
you could use the STAR model to say something like, during the client presentation yesterday, you were responsible for explaining the project timeline. However, you didn't provide clear deadlines for each phase, which led to some confusion and follow-up questions from the client.
Oh, okay. I see the difference there.
Yeah,
So the STAR model makes the feedback much more concrete and actionable.
exactly.
It's not just a general criticism. It's
Correct.
tied to a specific situation and its consequences.
Exactly. And that makes it much more likely that the person will understand what needs to change
Right.
and how to actually improve.
So structured frameworks can help.
Uh-huh.
What are some other strategies we can use to make our feedback more effective?
Another really crucial strategy is to focus on observed behavior.
Okay.
This ties back to that pitfall of making personal attacks.
Right. We want to make sure we're not making judgments about someone's character
Yes.
and instead sticking to the facts.
Precisely so. Instead of saying, you're lazy,
Mm.
which is an assumption about someone's inherent nature,
Yeah.
you might say, I've noticed that several deadlines have been missed this week.
Okay. That feels so much less accusatory.
It is.
It's just stating an observation without assigning blame.
And that can make a huge difference in how the feedback is received.
Yeah.
When we focus on behavior, we're opening the door for a productive conversation about what might be contributing to those missed deadlines,
Right.
rather than just labeling the person as lazy.
It feels more like problem solving and less like punishment.
Exactly. It's about working together
Yeah.
to find solutions.
What else can we do to kind of make sure our feedback is landing in the right way?
This next strategy is all about the delivery.
Okay.
It's about finding that balance between being empathetic and assertive.
Ooh, that sounds tricky.
It's a delicate balance.
Like walking a tightrope.
It can be, but it's so crucial
Yeah.
for effective feedback.
Okay.
We want to convey our expectations clearly and directly, but we also want to show that we understand and respect the other person's perspective.
So it's not about being nice. It's not about being mean. It's about being...
It's about being authentic and respectful while still holding people accountable.
I like that.
One way to achieve this balance
Okay.
is by using I statements.
Okay.
So, for example, instead of saying, you always interrupt me in meetings, you could say, I feel like I don't get a chance to finish my thoughts when I'm interrupted.
Oh, that's a good tip.
It shifts the focus from blaming to expressing your own experience.
Yeah, it feels less accusatory and more focused on finding a solution that works for both people.
Exactly. And it invites the other person to share their perspective and work collaboratively to find a solution.
So empathy and assertiveness.
Yes.
Got it.
Yep.
What else is important when it comes to delivering effective feedback?
Well, we've talked about the pitfall of not offering solutions.
Uh-huh.
So this next strategy directly addresses that. It's the importance of SMART goal setting.
Now remind me, what are SMART goals again?
So SMART goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Okay, right. So instead of just saying you need to be more organized,
Right.
You would set a SMART goal,
Right.
like,
You could say, let's work together to create a system for tracking deadlines. And your goal is to have all project tasks entered into the system and updated regularly with a 90% success rate by the end of the quarter.
okay, that's much more specific and measurable than just like a vague, be more organized. And
Exactly.
it has that timeline, which adds a sense of accountability.
Exactly. It gives the person a clear path forward and a way to track their progress.
So SMART goals are great for providing that direction and support.
Uh-huh.
What's the final strategy on our list?
The last strategy is all about follow-through.
Okay,
We've talked about the pitfall of lack of follow-up,
right.
but this is about making continuous support an integral part of the feedback process.
So it's not just a one-time conversation, it's an ongoing dialogue.
Right. It's about checking in regularly, offering additional resources or training, celebrating successes, and adjusting strategies as needed.
It's about creating that feedback-rich environment where people feel supported and encouraged to grow.
You got it. And the research shows that this kind of environment can have a huge positive impact on individual and organizational performance.
So we started with those pitfalls of negative feedback,
We did.
but we've ended up with a really empowering vision of how feedback can be a force for positive change.
And I think it's worth reflecting on our own experiences with feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Think about a time you received feedback that truly helped you grow what made it work.
Yeah.
And now flip the script. How can you become that kind of feedback giver for others?
That's a great question for all of us to ponder.
It is.
And for those of you who are hungry for more insights on this topic,
Yes.
we highly recommend checking out the full research article.
Absolutely.
We'll include a link in the show notes.
Yes, and until next time, keep those feedback conversations flowing. And remember, it's all about growth, not judgment.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.